It's the 22nd of January, 1909. Storied maritime writer James B. Connolly is on board the RMS Republic, a beautiful ocean liner of the White Star Line. The ship was still only a few hours out of New York, bound for Gibraltar. Connolly had previously served in the Spanish-American War alongside Teddy Roosevelt and was at the fabled Battle of San Juan Hill. The two men had become close personal friends. Connolly had earned his fame writing about the fishing vessels out of Gloucester, and, at Roosevelt's urging, writing up the adventures of the United States Navy with the Great White Fleet. And Connolly is now on board the RMS Republic to meet the U.S. naval fleet in Gibraltar. President Roosevelt personally granted him permission to rejoin the fleet as it returned to Gibraltar, so Connolly could write a story about the fleet's homecoming to the United States. Connolly was scheduled to board the USS Vermont at Gibraltar and then return home with the fleet. Connolly had a nice, pleasant evening with his new acquaintances, Eugene and Mary Lynch, as they chatted and socialized in the lounge of the RMS Republic. As the night progressed, Mrs. Lynch became worried, exclaiming, "Why the full speed in all this fog? We are all pleasure-bound here. None of us are in a great hurry. Why the full speed?" Connolly explains that these ocean liners have schedules to keep. Gibraltar, Alexandria, Cairo, Naples, Genoa. If one is delayed, they all get delayed. But this explanation still didn't sit well with Mary Lynch. Aren't we in danger of collision, going so fast on a foggy night, where so many steamers are coming and going? She asked. Connolly reassures her, telling her the Republic is the biggest and fastest boat on the waters, and there is no danger. Connolly leaves his guests in the lounge and goes for a stroll on the promenade deck. Pausing at the rail for a moment, he looked down into the smooth black sea rushing by and the dense fog enveloping the ship. Popping inside again, he enjoys a pint of Guinness and a cigar as he listens to the ship's foghorns bellowing every 2 minutes. Walking along the promenade deck again, on his way back to his cabin, he paused again. He'd been on ocean liners, Navy ships, and many other vessels before. He knew traveling at full speed in fog like this was dangerous, and he didn't like it. The RMS Republic, today, on Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs. Hello and welcome to Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs, tales of mishaps, misfortune, and misadventure. Thank you for joining me. One of the things I've enjoyed the most about doing this podcast are the connections I've made to people all over the world. The number of people who have reached out to me regarding my episodes or to relay a connection of some kind to a shipwreck has been very rewarding, and I'm very grateful for it. One such connection came recently from a descendant of James B. Connolly, Mr. Paul O'Donnell.
James B. Connolly was my grandfather's cousin. James was always really close to our immediate family. My father knew him really well. When my father was younger and James was getting older and didn't drive anymore, my father used to drive him. So he got a lot of stories that weren't included in any kind of journal or book. James B. Connolly was sea dog. He lived his life on the water. He lived his life on the ocean. He was on anything that floated and even went under the water, he was on it. Anything from racing yachts to battleships, the Virginia, Vermont, the Alabama, and he actually followed the Great White Fleet. Partially, he was supposed to go around the world with the Great White Fleet when Teddy sent them around, just to prove that America's a world power now.
You'll hear from Paul O'Donnell throughout the episode. On the 26th of February 1903, a new ship was launched from yard number 345 of Harland and Wolff Shipyard in Belfast, Ireland, now Northern Ireland. This new ship, called the Columbus, would later become the RMS Republic. Built for the International Mercantile Marine Company's Dominion Line, the Columbus was designed for 2,800 passengers and 300 crew. She was 15,400 tons, 570 feet long, and 67.8 feet wide, with 2 steam engines powering twin-screw propellers. Despite being one of the biggest ships on the ocean, she was also quite fast, being capable of 16 knots, or about 18 miles per hour. The new ship was also fitted with a Marconi wireless telegraph, a technology still in its infancy and uncommon for civilian ships. On October 1, 1903, the Columbus made her maiden voyage from Liverpool to Boston with first, second, and third class passengers. Before the end of 1903, International Mercantile and Marine transferred its Dominion Line Boston service to its White Star line and transferred the Columbus to White Star as well. It was at this time the ship was renamed to the RMS Republic. On the 17th of December 1903, the Republic departed on its first voyage as part of the White Star Line from Liverpool to New York. Despite bad weather, ice, and snow, the ship arrived in New York on the 27th of December. Less than a week later, the Republic made its first journey from Boston to the Mediterranean on the 2nd of January 1904, stopping at the Azores, Gibraltar, Genoa, Naples, and Alexandria. The Republic then settled into its Liverpool to Boston service in the summers and New York to the Mediterranean service in the winters. This was quite lucrative for the White Star Line, as the luxurious ship attracted wealthy Americans for first and second class. The Republic featured a beautiful dining saloon with ornate wood carvings, wood wainscoting, plush curtains, and could accommodate 200 diners. The decorative domed ceiling with its colorful stained glass was a favorite attraction. The ship's lounge was equally deluxe and was a favorite spot for female passengers. The smoking room, library, and first-class cabins were finely appointed with gorgeous furniture and amenities, and the second-class cabins were the finest of any ship afloat at the time. The Republic earned the nickname the Millionaire's Ship. The westbound service from the Mediterranean to New York proved to be equally profitable for the White Star Line. Immigration to the United States from Italy was booming, and the Republic's third class could accommodate 2,000 passengers. The ship was usually filled to capacity, and sometimes over capacity. Italians boarded in Naples, while Portuguese immigrants boarded at São Miguel in the Azores. The Republic saw its first rendezvous with trouble on the 3rd of June 1904 in the waters of the Boston Narrows. While passing the ship Halifax of the Plant Line, the two ships were drawn together by suction, or more specifically Bernoulli's principle. The Republic first struck the smaller Halifax on her port side, and again at her stern. There were no casualties, but the Halifax was forced aground on Lovell's Island and stranded for 7 hours. 3 years later, on the 16th of February 1907, the Republic struck the Centro America of the La Veloce line while entering Naples Harbor. The Republic suffered damage which required repairs. While these accidents were unfortunate, they were just minor compared to what was to come. On the 28th of December 1908, a 7.1 magnitude earthquake devastated the cities of Messina in Sicily and Reggio Calabria on the Italian mainland. 10 minutes after the earthquake, a tsunami washed over the region, adding to the catastrophe. The earthquake and tsunami destroyed buildings and homes, wiped out infrastructure, leveled the region, and killed 80 to 100,000 people, and left more than 200,000 people homeless. In the wake of this devastation, many survivors chose to leave the area. Some relocated to other parts of Italy or elsewhere in Europe, but a large number chose to leave for the United States. Survivors became refugees and were soon streaming across the ocean on passenger liners to start a new life. The Lloyd Italiano liner SS Florida was one of those ships. 29-year-old Captain Angelo Respini and crew departed Italy a short time after the earthquake, carrying 839 passengers. As the SS Florida was making its way across the Atlantic, the RMS Republic was preparing to depart New York for Gibraltar for its normal winter route. On the 22nd of January, 1909, the Republic departed New York at 3 o'clock p.m., with Captain Inman Silby at the helm. She was carrying a total of 742 passengers and crew. Among the notable passengers were James Ross Mellon of the Mellon banking family, along with his wife Rachel and their daughter Sarah. Also on board were Mrs. Sophie Mansfield Curtis, the wife of George Munson Curtis, the treasurer of the International Silver Company, Professor John M. Coulter and his wife and children, General Brayton Ives, St. Louis millionaire Samuel Couples, historian Alice Morse Earle, and Mildred Montague, the Countess Pasolini. Also on board was first-class passenger Leonard L. McMurray, who, in 1915, would go on to survive the sinking of the Cunard liner Lusitania. This was the millionaire ship, after all. In the early morning hours of the 23rd of January, the Republic was off the coast of Nantucket, near the Nantucket Lightship. She steamed into a thick fog, and visibility was poor, as is common in these waters due to the cool Labrador current intersecting with the warmer Gulf Stream. But Captain Sealby, wanting to stay on schedule, kept the ship at full speed despite the fog. However, he did sound the ship's foghorns every 2 minutes. When a reply whistle was heard from another ship, Captain Sealby took immediate action. He ordered the engines to full reverse and ordered the ship hard aport. This is called a tiller command, meaning the rudder is positioned to the port side, producing a turn to starboard. Suddenly, the SS Florida steamed out of the fog. There was no time to react, and nothing Captain Sealby could do. At 5:40 a.m., the Florida rammed the Republic amidships, plunging into its hull at a right angle. Engine room crewman John Hart was quoted in the New York Herald. In less time than it takes to tell came a terrible crash on the port side, and an instant later the big stem of a ship crashed through the steel plates, outer and inner, shoving aside frames and forcing its way in to within 5 yards of where I was standing. The vessel tore away everything on that side for 20 feet aft and then disappeared, and we could see the water rushing in below. In his cabin, James B. Connolly was jolted awake. Not an easy feat for a man who had slept on rocking and listing ships for many years. He could sleep through just about anything, but the unusual noise, something strange, this woke him, and he slid out of his bunk, practically directly into his shoes and trousers. His bunkmate asked, "What was that noise?" "A bump against the side of the ship," replied Connolly, as he exited the cabin and went on deck, where he saw the glowing red port side light of the SS Florida drifting away in the distance.
Nobody was really worried. Neither ship was going down very fast, but they were going down. Connolly is handing out life vests, and he's just, he's doing everything he can. And he's noticing some really bad seamanship. Now, this is a guy whose whole life was about the sea. He knew the sea. He knew what sailors should be doing and how they should be doing it. And they weren't. They were really, really bad at their jobs for the most part. And nobody was talking, James was asking questions here and there, because he knows he's going to wind up writing about it. But nobody's saying anything.
The bow of the Florida had plunged through the hull of the Republic, instantly killing Connolly's friend, Mary Lynch, and critically injuring her husband Eugene. Banker William J. Mooney was also killed, and his wife was badly injured. Radioman Jack Binns told the New York Times, "Captain Sealby was on the bridge all this time, but soon after I discovered the bodies lying near me. Dr. Marsh came along, and after examining the bodies, announced that both had been killed outright. Blankets were stretched over the two still forms, and a little later they were laid in coffins. It was not until a roll call had been made that the identity of the dead was established." The Florida's mangled bow had scraped and gouged down the Republic's main deck, cutting into the cabins and the Marconi radio room, and grinded its way to the stern, leaving twisted metal and splintered wood in its path. On the Florida, 3 of the crewmen who were in the bow were killed. In fact, 2 of the dead were mere boys. Balaguero Martuselli, age 16, Salvatore D'Amico, 14, and 23-year-old Pasquale Laval. The Republic was left with a gaping hole in her hull, and the cold North Atlantic waters quickly rushed in, flooding the engine room and boiler room. The Republic's engines were cut, leaving the ship without power. Within minutes, the ship was listing to port and was very clearly in a lot of trouble. Radio operator Jack Binns gathered himself after the collision and set to work sending a distress call. But the bow of the Florida had damaged the radio room, and worse, the ship had no power. After reassembling his equipment from the damage, Binns found spare batteries that had not been damaged and used them to power his Marconi wireless. At 6 o'clock a.m., Binns began tapping out the letters C, Q, D, which the Marconi company had designated as a distress call. CQ meaning attention all stations, and D meaning distress. Despite the circumstances, this was a momentous occasion. The distress call sent by Jack Binns over the Marconi wireless was the first ever CQD distress call to be sent, resulting in a successful rescue at sea. The faint signal was just enough to reach the Sunset wireless station on Nantucket, 60 miles or 96 kilometers away. The radio operator, Jack Irwin, then relayed the distress call to all ships in the area. Binns eventually was able to reach the RMS Baltic and communicate the distress call and position. The Baltic's radio operators, H.G. Tattersall and Gilbert Balfour, stayed at their posts for 52 hours straight, assisting with the rescue operation. J.G. Legg, fourth engineer on the Republic, rushed to the engine room. He knew if the cold ocean water reached the boilers, they would explode. He waded through the water and somehow managed to open all the valves on the boilers. Legg single-handedly prevented an explosion, saving the ship and quite possibly the lives of everyone on board. The ships of the Dominion Line were built with safety in mind, with watertight bulkheads and a double-reinforced hull. While slowly sinking, the watertight bulkheads were doing their job for the time being and slowing the descent of the ship. The Florida, while being badly damaged, was in no immediate danger of sinking. After assessing the damage to his own ship and assisting passengers and crew, Captain Ruspini ordered the Florida about to approach the Republic and assist with rescue efforts. At 7 o'clock a.m., the passengers on board the Republic watched hopefully as the Florida appeared again, this time slowly out of the fog. Captain Sealby ordered all passengers and most crew to immediately begin evacuating the ship. Using the ship's boats, the Republic's crew began the grueling process of rowing passengers to the nearby Florida. At 9:45 a.m., a message was received from the French liner La Lorraine, which was steaming toward the Republic. Another ship, the Mohawk, was also on the way, but it ran aground at Tilmer's Island. James B. Connolly, by this time, had changed into a suit and tie. As the passengers were being ferried into the lifeboats, he instead began to wander around, poking into little corners of the ship. When a crewman ordered him off the ship and into a lifeboat, Connolly argued, wishing to stay on the Republic. But orders were orders, and the famed writer boarded the last lifeboat to leave the Republic, with 4 other stragglers. Over the next 4 hours, passengers and crew were ferried to the Florida, which already housed over 800 passengers. With roughly 1,500 on board, the Florida began to show signs of being unstable. The United States revenue cutter Gresham was the first ship to arrive on the scene, having received the historic distress call from Jack Binns. Some of the passengers were placed on the Gresham to relieve the overburdened Florida. With all passengers off the Republic, Captain Sealby used the wireless to send a message to the White Star offices in New York, reporting the ship was still afloat, and there was no further danger for the passengers and crew. A large oil tanker, the City of Everett, arrived and pulled alongside the Florida. Its captain, Captain Moran, hailed the Florida, offering to take the Florida's passengers on board. But this offer was declined, and the tanker was ordered to stand aside for the RMS Baltic, which was another White Star Line ship. But as the Baltic approached, it veered away again, toward the drifting, damaged Republic, hailing the Florida, promising to come back. Confusion spread among the frightened passengers, and they wondered why they weren't being permitted to board the City of Everett. The ship was already there, ready and willing to assist, and now the Baltic had too veered away.
The rescue ship comes, and they come over like they're going to, hook up and transfer everybody off, but they don't do that. The fog is cleared now, and the Republic has gone away. They go off to the Republic for 5 hours. Well, this ship over here is sinking. And the reason was because there was $250,000 in gold coin that was meant for the sailors of the Great White Fleet. Because at that time, back then, other countries wouldn't take American script. You had to have gold. So the sailors were paid in gold. And there was $250,000 on the ship. Instead of starting to get people off, they go get the gold for 5 hours.
The RMS Baltic, commanded by Captain J.B. Ranson, searched for the Republic throughout the day. But with the Republic drifting in the dense fog, it was difficult for the Baltic to find the Republic. Finally, in the early evening of January 23rd, the Baltic heard the submarine bell of the Republic and spotted the helpless ship. The Florida, while not in danger of sinking, was badly damaged and lying low in the water. Finally, at approximately 11 o'clock p.m., the Baltic had finished its business with the Republic. Captain Ranson hailed the SS Florida and informed its crew that he was returning to take on passengers and crew. For the second time that day, passengers and crew were rowed to another ship. After 83 boatloads and 11 hours, the survivors from the Republic and almost everyone on board the Florida were evacuated to the Baltic. Eugene Lynch, whose wife Mary was killed, was critically injured during the accident. Both of his legs were broken, and he sustained many other injuries and lacerations. He and the wife of William J. Mooney were in no condition to be removed from the Florida, and they remained there in the sickbay. Eugene Lynch later died as a result of his injuries at Long Island College Hospital in Brooklyn on the 26th of January. After such a violent collision and 2 open sea rescues on lifeboats in such dangerous waters, the loss of only 6 people as a result of this accident is truly miraculous. During this process, the immigrant refugees from Italy were furious after being told they had to wait until all the first and second class passengers had disembarked, coming very close to a full-on riot. Nevertheless, all of them made it safely off the Florida to the Baltic. As James B. Connolly was lowered into the water on his lifeboat, his boat began to drift toward the Florida's propeller, which was now up out of the water. The boat's coxswain shouted, "Port oars pull." Connolly knew this command would shift them directly toward the propeller. Incredulous, he shouted, "Don't you mean starboard oars?" "Oh, aye," said the coxswain, "starboard." With only a skeleton crew remaining, the SS Florida started its slow journey toward New York, limping along with its crumpled bow. The SS New York followed the Florida, and La Lorraine was instructed to divert and follow the Florida as well. By 10:45 a.m. on the 24th of January, the Baltic departed, full of survivors, bound for New York. The SS Furnesia of the Anchor Line and the SS New York of the American Line had arrived earlier in the morning of the 24th to assist, as well as the Lucania of the Cunard Line. With the cutter Gresham, these vessels set out to locate the still drifting Republic somewhere in the fog. The Furnesia soon found the helpless ship and reported the position. The Gresham arrived shortly after and went to its bow, while the Furnesia went to the ship's stern. Captain Sealby and a small volunteer crew returned to the Republic and assessed the damage. After conferring for a time, they concluded the ship was certainly going to sink. The tanker City of Everett again offered to assist and offered to pump out the sinking ship, but Captain Sealby refused. It was later believed by some that Sealby didn't want any other company to have a claim to the salvage and cargo, quite possibly including a large cargo of gold, and he was waiting for another White Star vessel to arrive. By 6:30 p.m. on the 24th, the Furnesia and Gresham began to tow the Republic, hoping to make it to New York before the ship sank, and they were joined shortly after by tugs from White Star. But this salvage was not to be. While under tow, the Republic sank, stern first, at 8:07 p.m., Sunday, January 24th, 1909, 39 hours after the initial collision. She was the largest and most technologically advanced vessel to sink up until that time, and the second largest overall of her era. The only larger ship to sink was the RMS Titanic, just 3 years later. Vice President P.A.S. Franklin of the White Star Line said, "One thing that has been established beyond doubt is that the Republic's passengers owe their lives to wireless telegraphy. Had it not been for this great invention, it would have been impossible for the Republic to have communicated with her sister ships. And, if the fog keeps up as it has for the past 2 days, we might never have known the fate of the 2 boats." The attitude of the media and general public of unsinkable ships did not begin with the Titanic. The watertight bulkheads and safety features of the Republic gave it the reputation as being unsinkable as well, a decade before the Titanic disaster. On the 24th of January 1909, just a day after the collision, a column in the New York Evening Sun reported, "The Republic was built not only with an elaborate watertight compartment system, which generally reduces the danger of sinking in collision, but with a cellular double bottom, which makes her safer than many vessels of her time and class. She was as nearly unsinkable in theory as a vessel could be made when she was designed." Back on the Baltic, James B. Connolly thought about his work and how his story of the U.S. Naval Fleet's homecoming was now impossible. But still, he thought, a story about a collision at sea is newsworthy, and he set out to gather the facts during the voyage back to New York. That evening, a steward gave Connolly a wire message, and within an hour, he had received 37 messages from press associations and newspapers, requesting information about the loss of the RMS Republic. The people back in New York, London, Italy, and elsewhere were anxious to hear news of their loved ones. Here again is Paul O'Donnell.
He's mad now anyway. He's mad about how they're handling the whole situation. The SS Florida crew, he thought, very good seamen, very good. He had nothing bad to say, but these guys, bad. So they were heading back, and he knows he's got to write a story. And he knows when he gets into New York Harbor, there'll be reporters coming out in small boats. So he anticipates this. And he writes 2 articles. He writes one article about the incident. It's about 1,000 words. And another, and that was meant for colliers.
In his memoir, Seaborn, 30 Years of Voyaging, Connolly writes, "I finished my newspaper and collier's articles by dinner time. Together they ran to 5,000 words, and considering that I had to be sure of every fact, I thought it a fair day's work. In both articles I mentioned the steamer's illegal full speed, the crewmen's poor boat handling, and the Baltic's 5-hour delay in taking the passengers from that so badly damaged Florida. I wasn't for bearing down on anybody, and I did not bear down, but as an honest reporter I had to mention these things."
Connolly knows that the Baltic has wireless communication, and he wants to send his story about what happened. Well, they shut him down every time he asked. They said, no, we're not going to let you do it. We're not going to let you do it.
When the captain was brought in, he too refused Connolly's request. Connolly quickly drafted a message to the Associated Press, explaining he had been refused access to send his story of the accident, and handed it to the steward to be sent over the wireless. A few minutes later, the purser returned with the steward, handed the note back to Connolly, and said, "I refuse, absolutely, to send any such message." As the Baltic approached New York Harbor, a dense fog once again descended upon the ship. Connolly knew this meant the ship may have to moor outside of the harbor for the night. He also suspected ambitious members of the press would want to be first to get his story. He gave a $50 to a crewman to fetch him a tarpaulin and some rope. Then he paid him another $50 to bring him a foot-long wooden board. Connolly then hid the items under his coat and returned to the writing room where he wrote a new message. "I am asking of whoever picks up this news dispatch that in all fairness, he wire a copy of it to every newspaper and press association named on the list herewith." He then slipped this message along with the stories about the accident inside the tarpaulin, wrapped it up tightly to the wooden board, and again hid the entire bundle under his coat. Around midnight, a pilot boat from Sandy Hook arrived, and the pilot boarded the Baltic. Curious, Connolly approached the pilot. However, a ship's officer also approached at the same time. The pilot announced he had 2 letters for James B. Connolly. The ship's officer replied, "I will take those letters," and the pilot handed them over, apologizing to Connolly. The officer disappeared, and Connolly never saw those letters again. Sometime later, a ship's whistle was heard. It was the unmistakable whistle of a steamer in the distance. The whirring of the propellers could be heard as it got even closer, and finally the engine stopped. Suddenly, out of the fog, a voice rang out, asking if James B. Connolly was on board. Connolly shouted back, "Here!" The voice replied, "I'm Smith of the New York Herald." Just then, the same officer that took Connolly's letters yelled back at Smith, "You can't come aboard, sheer off." Smith then explained he had arranged with Connolly's brother, Michael, to publish Connolly's stories about the accident, and the Herald would pay any price. The officer shouted again angrily, "Sheer off!" Knowing this was his chance, Connolly shouted, "Never mind the money, stand by." Connolly took the tarpaulin bundle out of his coat, and the officer stepped toward him, saying, "No, you don't." But Connolly, a former Olympic champion in the triple jump, evaded his would-be nemesis and threw the package over the rail at the other boat, striking its side. A moment later, Smith shouted back, "I got it."
In his autobiography, he says that not a crewman, but an officer comes up to him and basically threatens him if he throws the article in the water or he throws it to his buddy. But my father, who was told directly by James B., he said the officer put a gun to his head and told him if he threw it, he'd blow his head off. Wow. Why he wouldn't put it in his autobiography, I don't know. Maybe it was just too unbelievable. But I have no reason to believe that either my father or James were lying about this. And sure enough, he threw it. He throws it in the water. And they pick it up. And now the ship line can't contain this. It's out there.
Connolly meandered around the promenade deck afterwards, followed and watched very closely by the ship's crew. The following day, the fog lifted, and the Baltic was able to enter New York Harbor and dock at the wharf. Connolly's story was printed in the New York Herald, causing much excitement among the people and anxiety for the White Star Line.
Not everybody loves James B. Connolly. James B. Connolly, he was the most famous person that you never heard of back then, in the early 1900s. There were some writers that were jealous of him, and some of them didn't like him because of his relationship with Teddy Roosevelt, because they didn't like him. So they had no problems smearing his integrity. And that's what they did. The New York World, we've never heard of. But I guess it was pretty big paper then. They were the number one smearers, but there were other ones too. The Times, I don't think they liked them very much. So Connolly had mentioned it to his friend when he threw it to him. He says, make sure all the papers get this. Well, this guy, he's a reporter. He wants the scoop. He's not going to hand it out to everybody. So they kept it. So not everybody got it. James really let him have it. I mean, he didn't hold back because his reputation was at stake. He just knew it was the right thing to do. It wasn't the right thing to do, as far as him, going against all these big corporations and businesses. He'd rather be right than president. He was one of those kind of people, I believe. But as they're disembarking, there were reporters asking questions. Oh, were you a coward? They called him a coward. They said that he charged the lifeboats to get on, and he grabbed an old lady's life jacket, and all these things. It was troubling for him, and he was going to sue. He was going to sue people. There was a steward and a cook on the Republic. Those were the two that came out that said he was a coward and he did all this stuff. But they lied a lot, and they got caught in lies. But the thing that really, I think, salvaged him was Teddy Roosevelt came out with an op-ed saying that James B. was one of the most honorable people he ever knew. And he hopes that his children would grow up to be just like him. That's paraphrase. And so that helped.
On the 27th of January, Connolly wrote a letter to President Roosevelt thanking him for the support, writing, "Dear Mr. President, I have just been told that you have said good words about me in regard to this Republic wreck. I thank you for it. I never doubted what you would think of me. No fear of friends, but the millions who do not know me may discredit my testimony as the result of the charge of one employee of an ocean steamship company." President Roosevelt arranged for Connolly to meet with the district attorney to go after the steward who made the accusations, but he had fled to Canada, and the issue was dropped. James B. Connolly published 200 short stories and 25 novels during his lifetime, and twice ran for Congress. Connolly died in New York in 1957 at the age of 88. No inquiry into the circumstances that led to the loss of the RMS Republic were ever held. Winston Churchill was the president of the Board of Trade at the time, the agency responsible for launching such an inquiry. But it never happened. The lack of an inquiry fed the rumors about the cargo and secrecy of the White Star Line. Some of the rumors suggest the Republic carried $265,000 in U.S. Navy payroll, thousands of dollars in relief funds for survivors of the earthquake in Italy, several $100,000 worth of silver ingots, and the hundreds of thousands of dollars of personal valuables from wealthy passengers. The ship was also rumored to have carried a secret shipment of gold for the Tsar of Russia, a $3 million 5-ton shipment of mint-condition American Gold Eagle coins. These are all 1909 values. In 2023, this cargo would be worth well over $100 million. Indeed, in 1909, Russia did refinance a 1904 loan from France during the Russo-Japanese War. Russia's embarrassing defeat left the empire in ruins, and it needed cash. The New York Post reported, Paris, January 12th. The shipments of gold from New York to Paris are destined for the Bank of France, which has arranged for the engagements through various Paris banking houses. The movement is a natural one resulting from a favorable rate of exchange. The gold is probably for assisting the flotation of the new Russian loan, which is announced for January 21st. The RMS Republic left New York on January 22nd. Although we cannot at this time be sure of what happened to the cargo of the Republic, there is a possibility that the Baltic unloaded the cargo from the Republic. Between the collision at 5:40 a.m. on the 23rd and the Republic sinking at 8:07 p.m. on the 24th, it is possible the cargo was offloaded. The location of the wreck of the Republic was also never released to the public, and Captain Sealby refused every request for information following the accident, adding to the uncertainty and lore of the ship. For decades, the legend and lore of the lost gold of the Republic grew. In 1981, American treasure hunter Martin Bayerl discovered the location of the Republic, 50 miles off the coast of Nantucket, lying upright under 270 feet of water. Bayerl raised money for investors, and efforts were launched to salvage treasure from the ship. However, Bayerl and his company, Mavis Inc., failed to find any gold, and instead found hundreds of bottles of wine and champagne. He offered a $25,000 reward for the blueprints to the ship that might indicate the location of the gold, but this information never came forward. Bayerl abandoned salvage efforts in 1987, and he was later convicted of voluntary manslaughter of his wife's lover. He served 2.5 years of a 5-year prison sentence. Bayerl battled the federal government for many years until finally, in 2011, a court awarded his company, Mavis Inc., exclusive title to the wreck of the Republic. Bayerl has since launched lordsoffortune.com, a crowdfunding site, to raise funds for further salvage efforts. The historic wireless telegraph message from the RMS Republic proved invaluable to the rescue of its passengers and crew. In addition, her watertight bulkheads did keep the ship afloat long enough to accomplish a successful evacuation. The Republic also reinforced the perception that White Star liners were nearly unsinkable, as her watertight bulkheads kept her afloat long enough to evacuate all passengers and crew. The, quote, successes of the Republic, if you will, masked the grossly insufficient safety measures at the time, not least of which was the lack of lifeboats for all passengers. Just 3 years later, the White Star Line would lose another of its luxury ocean liners, the RMS Titanic. It, too, had an insufficient number of lifeboats. That's going to do it for the story of the RMS Republic. A special thank you to Paul O'Donnell for joining me as my guest for this episode. Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs is produced, written, and edited by me, Rich Napolitano. You can follow Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs on social media at ShipwrecksPod and at shipwrecksandseadogs.com. Original theme music is by Sean Siegfried, and you can follow him on YouTube at Sean Secret or on the web at sean.siegfried.se. I'm also happy to announce the launch of the Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs merch store. There are several designs, multiple colors and styles, and all sizes. Check it out, support the show, and get a new fancy shirt. Just go to shipwrecksandseadogs.com and click merch. Thanks again for joining me, and until next time, don't forget to wear your life jackets.